I think the idea is great, and we as institutions in Turkey are ready to give any kind of support that you need in order to improve first the center and then the bilateral relations. My colleague Masoud gave an general overview about the Turkish foreign policy, where it is headed, where it used to be, and where it is headed right now, by touching upon several points within Turkish policy making circles. I'll try to delve more into the Middle East, actually, the complexities of the Middle East, and try to give you an overview of how Middle East has been seen by Turkey, especially the current developments, whether be it in Syria or Iraq or the Gulf region. From the point where I am looking at the Middle East, I think four major phenomena have been shaping the Middle Eastern politics, and it's going to keep shaping Middle East in the near future. I think these four phenomena are something that we both, as Turkey and Pakistan, have been suffering from. And if we are going to talk about what we can do in the future, how we can proceed with our ties or cooperation, I think we have to find a solution to these four phenomena or sources of problem. Without finding a sustainable solution to these problems that I'll be speaking of momentarily, I don't think we can give a semblance of normality to the Middle Eastern politics. The first problem or phenomenon that we have been facing in the Middle East are the failed states or the weak states. Those states which cannot control or patrol their borders. In these countries, the social contract between the states and the people disappeared. So people doesn't feel themselves belonging to a state. The state itself cannot provide security or other social services to their own people. And the sovereignty of these states are under question, under heavy question. Either there is a huge foreign involvement, or some other groups have been controlling at least certain portions of the territory in these states. I don't think it was a coincidence that we have seen the rise of ISIS or ISIS type of groups in two major countries in the Middle East, Syria and Iraq. Both are striking examples of failed states or weak states at best. I mean, the reasons that turned these states into weak states, I think, paved the way for the rise of several groups, several terrorist groups like ISIS. And you can find lots of parallelism between these countries and other countries where you can find many non-state actors, including terrorist organizations. The second phenomenon or the problem in the Middle East have been the proxy wars. Proxy wars have been used as a tool by mainly regional or global actors, superpowers or global powers, in order to settle their own hostilities or animosities toward an enemy by using a proxy rather than going into a direct fight with these enemies. And Middle East, unfortunately, starting from the Cold War years, maybe accelerated during the Cold War years, but as we have seen recently in the Middle East, it has topped, it has reached at a new peak in the Middle East, that we have been seeing proxy wars all over the region. It's either US or Russia, or Iran and the Gulf countries. We have Israel using proxies against other Arab states. Instead of fighting directly against each other, they have been using proxies. And unfortunately, when it comes to proxies, the countries that suffered most out of these proxy wars were not those countries who are using their proxies, but the proxies and the countries that that proxies originate. I mean, Syria has been seen as proxy war of different dimensions, and it's not. It has not been those countries who have been using the proxies, but Syria itself has been suffering the most. Hundreds of thousands of people have died so far. Millions of people left their homes, either living some other places in Syria or went out of country. We have around 3 million Syrian refugees in Turkey, for example. I mean, that very concept of proxy wars even mutated into new kind of phenomena, like hybrid wars. In Syria, for example, we have the proxy war, but we also saw that certain countries also intervened directly, fighting alongside with their proxies. Like Iran has been fighting with alongside the militias that they were sent by Iran. Russians, the same thing. I mean, Russian soldiers have been fighting alongside the Chechens that they mobilized in Chechnya and sent to Syria. So the proxy wars, I think, opened the ways for the rise of the third phenomenon that I would like to talk about, and they are the non-state actors. We have seen the collapse or the decline of state as the main source of power and the actor who has the monopoly of violence in their hands, and the rise of violent non-state actors, especially terrorist organizations, have been a widespread phenomenon in the Middle East. Look at what happened in Syria or in Iraq. For the past 4 or 5 years, we have been talking about non-state actors more than states themselves. We have been talking about ISIS, for example, more than Iraqi state. We have been talking about Raqqa, for example, more than Damascus. We have been talking about Mosul, the so-called capital of ISIS, more than Baghdad. So the rise of the violent non-state actors phenomenon have been one of the results of these weak states and the proxy wars. It's not only the ISIS that I am talking about. I mean, PKK, for example, a terrorist organization operating in 4 different countries, in Turkey, in Syria, in Iraq, in Iran. They have different branches in those countries. They have been, undermining the state structures, killing civilians. According to many reports written by international human rights organizations, they have been ethnically cleansing certain villages or cities. Al-Qaeda, it's still there, another violent non-state actor. I mean, they're not as powerful as ISIS in certain areas, but they're still there, Al-Qaeda. Or other groups, other violent non-state actors, now fighting alongside with the Syrian regime. Certain militias under different banners and names. They are still the problem. So their rise also, unfortunately, opened the ways for the decline of the central armies. I mean, just remember what happened in Mosul. When ISIS came, the central Iraqi government's army just left the city, escaped, by leaving behind their weapons, their uniforms and everything. So they have been undermining the authority of the central armies in these countries. And the last phenomenon, again very much related with the first 3 phenomena that I listed, refugees. I mean, you as Pakistan are quite familiar with the concept of refugees. And for the past couple of years, we as Turkey became quite familiar with the refugee. Not that we didn't have refugees, but not in that number let's say 5-6 years ago. Now Turkey is hosting more than 3.5 million refugees, both Iraqi and Syrians. They already, changed the nature of certain cities in Turkey. I mean, the city that I'm from, for example, in the southern part of Turkey, more than half of the population are people coming from Syria. So it changed the character of the city. It's not a new phenomenon, but especially because of those proxy wars, the civil wars, failed states, as well as the rise of the violent non-state actors in the Middle East, they became a very serious problem, a problem that we have to work on to find a solution to. Otherwise, we are going to be seeing huge social, economic, and especially security problems in the near future. I mean, after listing these four phenomena, let me briefly, deal with three main issues that Turkish foreign policy is now facing in the Middle East. First, Syria. I'm sure everyone is wondering about what we're trying to do in Syria. There may be some resemblances between Afghanistan and Pakistan in the sense that you have a long border with Afghanistan, and what happens in Afghanistan has a direct impact on Pakistan. The same is true with Syria and Turkey, I would say. We have a 900 kilometers of border in Syria, and that border, truly speaking, has been a superficial one alongside the history. The Turkish side of the border and the Syrian side of the border, people are pretty much are the same people. They speak the same language, they eat the same food, they think, they approach the world in a quite different, similar way. So what happens in the Syrian side of the border has been affecting Turkey very closely. That's why Turkey has been so sensitive about what's happening in Syria. Turkey, probably from the beginning of the crisis in Syria, has been saying that there is no military solution to the crisis in Syria. And that's why we have been working to find a political solution in Syria. We talk with different actors, starting from Assad himself in 2011. It didn't work. We opened new channels with the Arab League and see if we can find a solution. Through the Arab League, it didn't work. We tried the United Nations, it didn't work. And then a new process with Iran and Russia started, the Istana Process. It's the 7th round of Istana Process are done in Kazakhstan. Although it's not the best option that we have at this moment, it's the only concrete way out of the problem or the crisis in Syria. These three actors have big stakes in Syria and coming together to find first, certain de-escalation zones throughout Syria in order to stop the spilling of blood in the first phase, and then, prepare a political base to trigger a larger international and sincere political talks in Geneva. So Istana Process that Turkey has been a part of can be accepted as a kind of a backgrounder, a support unit for the future talks that will take place in Geneva. What else? Turkey has been again fighting against ISIS since 2013 when the terrorist organization emerged in Syria in different ways. First, we used the Syrian opposition against, we supported the Syrian opposition against ISIS. It didn't work very well. Then we started to strike ISIS, but not intervening directly. It didn't work. It wasn't very efficient. And the third step, Turkey intervened directly and cleared and liberated a good portion of land in northern Aleppo countryside. The operation, called the Euphrates Shield, liberated the northern countryside of Aleppo. And after the liberation, Turkey is now trying to reconstruct those strip of land by opening up schools, hospitals, other economic activities. As a matter of fact, thousands of people have already returned. I mean, Syrians have already returned to those areas after seeing that they can actually live there, they can do business, they can send their children to the schools without fearing of an attack or other dangers. So Turkey actually created a great example that if we can create semblances of normality inside Syria, at least some of these Syrians will return to their home countries. So it is a partial solution to the problem of the refugees that we have. The second country, Iraq. Probably similar thing is true with Iraq too. I mean, we have a long border with Iraq, and whatever happens in Iraq directly affects us. That's why Turkey has been advocating the territorial integrity of Iraq since the beginning. That's why Turkey was against the independence of a new state in the northern part of Syria. And we have seen a rise of a regional consensus on that. Iraqi central government, Turkey, and Iran actually were the main opponents of the independence movement in the northern part of Iraq. The problem with Iraq, the reasons they made Iraq a weak state or failed state in certain periods are still existent, unfortunately. In Iraq, we need a new social contract between the people and the state. Maybe a new constitution, a good, fair, and internationally observed elections, a long political reconciliation process to create, first and foremost, something that Turkey has been advocating for years, an ulterior Iraqi identity. Instead of people, feeling, Shiite or Sunni, Kurdish, Turkmen, or Arab, they should feel themselves as Iraqi. It's the only solution that we have. And lastly, the Gulf, the rivalry in the Gulf, or Iran-Iraq rivalry. I mean, we already have, as you have seen, enough problems in the region, and we don't need another proxy war that will, exacerbate the already complicated situation in the Middle East. That's why Turkey has been mediating between the Saudis and the Qataris, between Iranians and the Saudis. I think we are at a stage where we don't need more, superficial conflicts that will not undermine the stability and peace and prosperity in the region, but also will give a rise to the new weak and failed states, non-state actors, proxy wars, and ultimately the refugees. Let me stop here and entertain any questions if you may have. Thank you.
With your permission.